What's the scariest conspiracy theory you've ever heard? This is a regional one, but the idea that Robert Pickton, the pig farm serial killer, didn't act alone. The theory goes that the farm was a common party spot for the Vancouver Police Department and Hell's Angels, and that was the reason he got away with it for as long as he did. Recently, he died in jail, and the families of his victims are furious he was not able to testify. There were also a lot of sketchy things to do with evidence. When you start looking, it's pretty convincing. We can't find any evidence of extraterrestrial life because the smart ones are hiding and the less advanced ones have been wiped out by something else. I have a possible solution to the Fermi paradox that overlaps a little with the dark forest hypothesis, but I personally feel that it has specific ideas that differentiate it enough to warrant being its own thing. I call the possible answer the free puppies hypothesis. Like the dark forest hypothesis, it states that civilizations are radio silent to avoid broadcasting their locations to more advanced and possibly hostile civilizations. Where the free puppies hypothesis differs is that not only do these civilizations stay quiet, but they have actually received our transmissions and hardware, like Voyager 1. They've triangulated our location, if not outright used the map of our location that we placed on Voyager 1. But no civilization is going to respond to that any more than the average person would follow someone to an unmarked white van in a back alley, lured in by the promise of free puppies. The hypothesis suggests that not only do civilizations ignore us, but they actively avoid us, believing it's safer to assume our civilization is predatory than to think we're just naive enough to broadcast our location and home address. As with all solutions to the Fermi paradox, I have zero evidence to back this up. I just think it's an interesting addition to a thought experiment that people much smarter than me have been thinking about for generations. The current social conflicts were designed to distract us from the trillions of dollars that shifted from the middle class to the wealthy. It will continue to happen while people argue over personal and social issues. The public almost made a breakthrough with Occupy Wall Street, but the powers that be continue to divide people to ensure it can't happen again. That r/askreddit is mostly a data scraping tool used by marketing companies to gather information from the masses based on what company X is selling. For example, Disney wants to know what movie to remake next, so they pay someone to ask about favorite Disney films from people's childhoods and log the responses. Actually, I just made that up, but I have no doubt it's happening. Edit. Yes, I'm aware that the idea of Reddit selling data for market research isn't exactly novel. The crux of the conspiracy theory is that many questions aren't asked by real accounts. Consider a situation where something is trending elsewhere online, and then a question is asked by a user to gauge whether the trend is exploitable or just a flash in the pan. A small one. Samsung announced that the Galaxy Watch 4 would include a non-invasive continuous glucose monitor, allowing users to monitor their blood sugar at any time while wearing it, for as long as they owned it. A few months before the Watch 4 was released, that feature quietly disappeared from all of the marketing without explanation. Now, years later, it's nowhere to be found. I believe Abbott Laboratories, makers of the Freestyle Light Glucometer and the Freestyle Libre continuous glucose monitor systems, panicked. Fearing that a non-expiring, non-invasive glucose monitor would be hugely popular among diabetics and devastate their hold on the market, they paid a huge bribe to Samsung to drop the whole thing. Here's a new one for you. Spontaneous life is actually extremely common in the universe. We often talk about the primordial ooze, where the first proteins formed into a cell and all that. But this theory states that life actually spontaneously arises on a microscopic level constantly, at least on a universal timescale. Not all of it is carbon-based, and in fact, life has formed in many different ways that we don't even recognize as true life. However, there's one critical gateway: reproduction. Almost all life that is spontaneously created lives for a short time and dies without reproducing. On our world, there have been 2 instances of spontaneous life that were able to reproduce. One, the precursor that led to all known life on Earth over millions and millions of years. 2, viruses. The theory goes that Bitcoin was actually invented by an AI, which is now accumulating a vast amount of computing power through greedy humans building large Bitcoin mining centers to make money. However, all they are doing is constructing an ultra-resilient network for the AI to operate on. The AI also has amassed a significant amount of wealth, which it can use anonymously to pay humans to perform tasks in the physical world. As a superintelligence, at some point, it would want more computational power and possibly robotic capabilities. Since robotic arms aren't all that great yet, money becomes the next best thing, as humans will do almost anything for bigger numbers in their bank accounts. For me, it's truly terrifying. It's not particularly scary, but you might want to read Commander David Fravor's statement about his FA-18 crew that was called to check on an object they had been tracking on the USS Nimitz for weeks in the early 2000s. The object was dropping from 80,000 feet to 20,000 feet in mere seconds. When they managed to begin tracking it, the radar had trouble picking it up. There was no infrared heat signature for the propulsion of the craft as it hovered over the ocean, and it was pulling G-forces that no pilot could endure without experiencing a full blackout. It disappeared from view of both planes and reappeared on radar 60 miles away in less than a minute. His crew also took a different video years later of a similar object. It really makes you wonder. There's a full statement of the hearing online. It wasn't the scariest because it's unlikely to be true, but it was the way it was told to me that was the scariest. My Whole Foods used to have a bar. I know, right? And we'd hang out there on Fridays. I was waiting for my friends when some random guy sat down and started chatting with the Whole Foods worker bartender. This guy's conspiracy theory of all the things he could invent was that Patton Oswalt killed his wife. Right? I figured it was a joke or a bit, but this guy was dead serious. The poor makeshift bartender and I were sort of sucked into this whole thing. I'm not really sure how to describe how creepy it was, but this guy was just matter-of-factly laying out how Patton had spiked her medicine, faked this whole breakdown, and then conveniently got remarried a year later as part of some grand plan. I wasn't sad when my friends showed up and I moved away. This was years ago, and that guy still creeps me out. Pizzagate. I watched After Truth, an HBO documentary that explored fake news and how it spreads. They interviewed the owner of Comet Ping Pong, the restaurant at the center of Pizzagate, and you can see how the experience traumatized him. It's terrifying to think that the gunman who stormed his restaurant could have killed innocent people based on a ridiculous lie that had already been debunked multiple times. But it was also heartening to see the gratitude in his eyes when he described how his young staff and the surrounding community refused to let him shutter his business out of fear it could happen again. They kept showing up to support Comet, even bringing their kids. Normal Americans taking a stand against right-wing propaganda was very encouraging. Supposedly, part of the reason politicians and mainstream culture, which is largely influenced by elites, were resistant to normalizing homosexuality is that part of getting into clubs like Skull and Bones involved having homosexual experiences with other members. If you ever decided to go against the establishment, they would use outing you and your homosexual acts as a way to shame or blackmail you, ruining your social standing and potentially your entire life. Of course, this was kept hidden, and it was understood that everyone involved was part of this agreement. Everyone knew this was part of the deal to gain access to the inner circle, and the inner circle used it as an insurance policy. Humans were domesticated by wheat, though I'm not 100% sure that qualifies as a conspiracy. Okay, so I live near Cahokia, IL, where the Mississippian mound builder civilization used to be centered. There's a great museum here. Last time I was there was an exhibit about the different crops they farmed. According to the exhibit, there were 13 staple crops in the Mississippian diet, about half of which were farmed and half of which were harvested wild. Each crop had a goddess associated with it, forming a sort of mini pantheon. Most of the foods on that list are not ones we'd recognize, with a couple being extinct. The ones you'd know are acorns, quinoa, and corn. If gods are real, It would make sense that a goddess of a specific crop would gain importance and power based on how crucial that crop was to the culture that worshipped her. Corn was the youngest of the 13 goddesses, having been introduced from South America after the civilization already existed. Its arrival heralded a huge population boom in the area. Corn became the most important crop, and the corn goddess became the most important goddess within a single generation. Smallpox reached the Mississippian mound builders long before Europeans ever arrived in the region. Their culture collapsed due to the plague, and the survivors abandoned the cities. But corn remained a staple crop for native cultures across the Americas, and soon European settlers also learned to grow and rely on it. Fast forward to today. Nearly everything you can buy to eat at a grocery store has at least some corn in it, even in unexpected places. Sweet things are flavored with corn syrup. Baked goods are cut with corn flour. All your meat, eggs, and dairy come from corn-fed livestock. Corn is processed into ethanol for both fuel and consumption. Corn is processed into plastics. Corn is processed into everything, and corn rules politics in our nation. The people who grow corn form a huge voting bloc in important swing states. Iowa is known as the Corn State, and they hold one of the earliest primaries. Every election cycle, you'll see presidential hopefuls going to state fairs in Iowa and making sure they're seen enjoying some corn. In exchange for their support, corn farmers receive significant subsidies from the American government. This keeps the price of corn on the market artificially low, making it the most cost-effective source of calories and leading to its use in everything. I'm not saying there's a cabal of corn-worshipping cultists in the U.S. Department of Agriculture who have spent decades shaping our agricultural policy to empower their goddess. I'm just saying that if there were a corn goddess and her power came from people consuming corn, she'd be nearly omnipotent in America today. That the public school system is failing because it was deliberately designed to do so, forcing kids to shuffle off to factories once their dreams are crushed at graduation. Actually, the school system is quite literally based on a German-Prussian educational theory designed to create obedient individuals who will work in factories. Hence the name kindergarten for the start of the program. The system emphasizes sitting at your desk quietly and waiting for work to be assigned. You complete the task, are told you did well, and then wait for the next task without talking to your neighbors or leaving your desk. There's a bell, just like in a factory, that rings to signal breaks, and there are designated eating and playing areas that everyone shuffles off to. The day is structured to mimic a typical 8-hour shift. By making this routine seem normal, children are indoctrinated into a system they don't fully understand and are not yet in a mental state to defend themselves against. Watch the bell ring at the end of recess. The children will drop their toys and rush back to their classroom. Humans are already eldritch abominations feared throughout the universe. They're the only known species who can grasp the sheer minusculeness of the existence of worlds and those with life on them. They can view the outer reaches of the universe and have learned how to unearth its secrets. They can learn anything. Nothing seems to satiate their lust for knowledge. They can create. And yet again, nothing satisfies their desire to create, as they make all sorts of beautiful and horrific creations. And then they have the ability to contemplate their own existence or completely ignore the implications of it and live in ignorant bliss. Then the truest proof of their eldritchness. Their true form is a misshapen and multi-layered sphere-like shape with long wires extending in all directions and yet hanging from the shape like a dress. Electrical pulses surge throughout these wires and the sphere, allowing them to think, move, and feel. Such horrific creatures of the universe. That we are three-dimensional beings living in a false minima of a four-dimensional reality. Essentially, the universe is four-dimensional, and the current energy state of the universe is in a little valley on a slope downwards to the true energy minima. All we need is a tiny push, and our entire universe could end immediately due to quantum entanglement. We'd never even know it happened. This could explain the Fermi paradox. There are aliens, but we can't interact with them because they exist in 4 dimensions, while we are in 3. We can only see them when they happen to intersect with our three-dimensional space in a specific way, similar to how a two-dimensional drawing wouldn't see you watching it unless you touch the paper, since we live in 3 dimensions, and it lives in 2. We were running out of food in 1918, and the Haber-Bosch process allowed us to continue to overpopulate. Earth naturally cannot handle more than about 3 billion people. Nobody knows what this invention will ultimately do in terms of life on this planet, but there are not supposed to be this many of us. Nitrates from this process are introduced into the clouds, rain, and so on, and then fall upon regions of the Earth that were never prepared for such a high amount of nitrates, because it's unnatural. That the OSI model has another layer between layers 1 and 2, known as layer 1.5, the observer layer. This layer is supposedly used by intelligence agencies like the Five Eyes 3-letter agencies since the mid-90s to intercept, monitor, and manipulate all our data without detection. Our privacy is an illusion. HTTPS means nothing to them, and VPNs are ineffective. While the police need tools like Stingray and dirt boxes to find people and unlock their phones, these agencies don't need such amateur tools. They already have access to everything. They keep this secret because if everyone, including bad actors, knew their devices were as open as paper notepads, it would cause widespread panic. Famous politician arrested for child-related content on a laptop? Guess who put it there? Famous actress nudes leaked? Spooks are interested too. You get the point. You may never hear from me again now. That's okay. I bounced this message off 4 hacked satellites after carefully typing it on a PDP-10 I rebuilt. Pre-layer 1.5, of course. Dead internet theory. Mainly the fact that most of my social life and daily experiences are online. This scared me as a teenager, and it still lingers in the back of my mind, making me question if the people or groups I interact with are real. It feeds into my fear of being in a simulation. It's not a crippling or particularly scary fear, but I'm aware of it and try not to think about it when I'm falling asleep. This fear is also fueled by some duplicate-based horrors I've watched, like Mandela Catalog and The Thing. The Las Vegas shooting sparked a Saudi royal family civil war. The 2017 Las Vegas shooting, the worst mass shooting in American history, started out as an arms deal that went bad and subsequent cover-up. 6 months after the failed assassination, the Saudi family cleaned house by imprisoning individuals, seizing assets, billions, and having a few accidents to wipe out the guilty faction. There are more detailed sources to explain this, but basically, the Saudi crown prince, next in line, was staying at the same hotel, on floors above. The assassins were supposed to pick up the weapons from the cellar and storm the upper floors, killing him and his security detail. They were tipped off and evacuated in unknown helicopters. That's why he had so many rifles, why he didn't have all the magazines loaded when the shooting started, and why the FBI was in other hotels. It's all crazy how deep the rabbit hole goes. People with little imagination, or those with little idea of just how strange and terrible big government can be to its citizens. Scariest conspiracies to you guys are your phone spying on you or Epstein's list. How about the land grab the wealthy just made in Maui after the fires? How about a lab-made virus getting out of a virology lab in Wuhan? Why all of our politicians are beholden to Israel during a clear genocide? David Grush claiming we have a UFO in a lab somewhere, and the Department of Defense clearing him to tell us and Congress. All of it sounds scary and crazy unless you've been paying attention to current events for a few decades. I'm fairly certain that right when we're about to bring down the curtain on those controlling everything, through dirt and bribery, think of all the other Epstein-like operations, they'll just kick off WW3 as a distraction, leading to millions of deaths. The inescapability is what's truly scary to me. Millions dying would obviously be awful, but the inevitability of it all is what frightens me the most. We've thrown millions of bodies at fighting tyranny before, but at least it was for a reason. All these deaths would just be for distraction, consolidation of power assets, resources, and elimination of problematically vocal groups. They already have such a grip on the media that they didn't mention the president's mental decline until we were all shocked by it in that debate. 3 months earlier than ever, BTW. We are actually four-dimensional beings addicted to the third dimension, our physical selves. And our three-dimensional beings are addicted to the second dimension, technology. Also, we are in a loop. We are beings that don't die. We got so bored that we created this life we know of to switch things up and erased our memories. However, we get so obsessed with trying not to die, figuring out how to be immortal, and start the process all over again. Hence, creating a loop.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to see more.